Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today's session. I want to help you get a triple win. I call the triple win getting into Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. It's kind of a fluke situation when that happens, so I want to be realistic about it. But I do want to talk to you here today about what we see these successful clients or these successful candidates do in their application to receive this sort of coveted trifecta of acceptances. But before we dig into all of that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about me. My name is Liza Weale. I am from Gatehouse Admissions. I'm the founder of Gatehouse Admissions. I actually got my MBA at MIT Sloan many years ago. And when I graduated from MIT Sloan, I then headed to Bain & Company for several years and then built my career primarily in product management and brand marketing in the educational technology space. And it was actually during my time at Bain that when I came out of MIT Sloan and I was a consultant at the firm, I started working with associate consultants who were pre-MBAs, and they started applying to business school. And just because I was working with them in our day job, I was like, oh, I'll read your essays. And little by little, this became very much a very big side hobby of mine. And then it became an actual full-fledged career. I started doing this, coaching people on the application process to business school about in a full-time capacity about a decade ago. And I just recently launched Gatehouse Admissions. I saw a real need specifically around these schools, Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. I saw that the bar to admissions kept on creeping up higher, and I wanted to build a team of graduates specifically from these programs to help candidates succeed in the application process. So in founding Gatehouse Admissions, I really codified the Gatehouse way. It's the approach that we use to partner deeply with our clients and help them embark in the reflection and the introspection and the practice and the reps that's necessary for these schools. All right, so that's enough about me, but at least you know who you're talking to. I want to talk about the rest of the stuff that you're here today about. So we're going to cover a few things today. I want to just set the stage around the outcomes and the stats, just kind of level set about how sort of challenging this can be. And then I want to go through some case studies looking at people who have had these triple successes, if you will, the triple winners, and just sort of highlight the themes that we see and in a way that I hope will be beneficial to you, whether you're thinking about just applying to one, to several, or none of them. Any answer is okay. And actually the learnings that we'll go through will be applicable for any school, really. And then I'm going to share some tactical considerations just as you start embarking on your application process. And then we'll have some Q&A. So definitely think about your questions. I'm happy to answer them. And just so you know, we will have a little quiz in the process. So I want to hear a little bit more from you, or at least keep you on your toes with some math, because that's always fun. So, all right, before we get into the quiz though, I want to talk a little bit about outcomes and the stats. I think probably if you're here, you know how elusive these schools can be from an application and acceptance point of view. And I just like to run the numbers just directly in front of you, because I always think that when you actually think about the number of applicants, the small number of applicants that are accepted and the large number of applicants who aren't, that sort of helps underscore just how competitive this process is. So just looking at Harvard, this was in the 2019 to 2020 application season. They received over 9,000 applications, and they had a 10% acceptance rate. Their class size is a little over 900. In a typical year, right now, things are a little bit different in flux for this coming year and the year that we're just in the middle of right now. But in general, it's around 900 or so. So 940 people are attending. Over 8,000 people were rejected. 8,000 people, and 8,000 people who probably, had a shot, had a chance of getting in. Some of them maybe not. Some maybe it was a real long shot. But a lot of these folks, a lot of those 8,000 people were probably qualified enough to get into the program. It is just a little bit that there is too much good quality, number of good quality applicants out there that the school is trying to evaluate. All right, let's look at Things get a little bit worse before they get any better, depending on which way you look at it. So we're going to look at the Stanford, the GSB next. So Stanford has a smaller program, so you're not going to see quite as many applications, but it is a smaller program, and therefore it has an even more aggressive acceptance rate because there's just fewer spots. It's, you know, the average class size, this is actually even a little higher, sometimes 450 to 500 in that range. So out of, you know, 7,300 applicants, it has a 7% acceptance rate, 500 incoming class. Again, almost 7,000 people were rejected. And note, if you guys are, you know, studying your GMAT, you know this, that's not necessarily, those two numbers at the bottom aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. You could be in that same bucket and you just get 2 no's, or you could be 2 different people. Whatever it is, it's a lot of rejections. The numbers are a little better at Wharton, but not much. 7,000 applicants, they have a higher acceptance rate, which is great. And we'll talk a little bit about how to leverage that for, you know, a number of applicants that are accepted. And then really it is the rejected applicants is over 5,000. So Wharton has bigger class, which is great. It works to your advantage, but there's still 5,000 people that are getting rejected from these schools. This is a really challenging process, and I don't want to sort of, you know, downplay that. Success at acceptance at any one of these schools, let alone all 3, is much rarer than failure. Failure is a more common outcome. So with that, now that I've kind of, you know, laid out all the bad news, we'll talk about how to get around it in a second. But I want to take a little quiz first. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and let's see. And then I'd ask you guys to go ahead and use the link on the screen to join the quiz at Kahoot. You'll see the URL and the PIN 6653881. I have to warn you guys, there's some math, maybe, or you can just use it more of a guessing game, which is I did. So I'd say to go ahead and take a peek there, and we'll see if folks can come in. And don't worry, it's pretty low keyed. While there is a right answer, I'm going to tell you why the answer is a little bit misleading, regardless. So definitely take a moment if you can. So get us psyched up for the rest of the presentation. And if nobody joins the contest, then I'm going to win. All right, there's one. We got one. I'm excited. So again, if you, I think we lost, oh yeah, you guys can see at the top. This question is all about the chances of you being one of those triple trifectas and getting accepted into all the programs. All right. All right, so what are someone's chances of getting into at least one of either Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton? Is it 71%, 56%, 36%, or 14%? All right, so one person said 36 and one person said 14. The correct answer is 36%. you've got a 36% chance of getting into at least one of them. That sounds good, but I'm going to talk more about that percentage later because it's deceiving, of course. But good job at that one. Let's do one more. Lovely Eagle with a win. All right, so what are someone's chances of getting into all three, Harvard, GSB, and Wharton? Is it 16%, 4%, 1%, or less than 1%? All right, so this is extraordinarily hard. It is actually less than 1%. Now, I did this, most of the stuff isn't even tested on the GMAT, and I admit that I had to log online and find a little, something to calculate the chances. So it's a little bit misleading though, because what these numbers actually assume is that everything else is equal, right? That everybody is as strong as a candidate as the next person, so their chances are the exact same. Fortunately, it's not that easy. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, it kind of depends on where you sit in that bucket. But nevertheless, I think this underscores it's really hard to be accepted into all these programs. It's very hard to be. We just saw the acceptance rate for any one of them. It's really hard to be accepted into any one of them as well. That said, I am a firm believer the number of at-bats matter. The number of schools that you apply to, as we just seen, if you look at this on a pure chance basis, if you put in, the same number of qualified, strong applications, or the more strong applications you put in there, the more likely you're to get a positive response. So anyway, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Good job on the quiz, guys. Let us see. Hold on a second. All right. Let me make sure I don't know. Let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay. Except, let me get it in the other format, guys. There we go. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep going. So as I said when we were just looking at the quiz results, the challenging part of this, of course, is that the chances really do depend on who you are. So those numbers are really small, but it's good. Yes.
Sorry, can you take the presentation to full screen mode? It's not in full screen mode. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Thank you. Hold on a second. Let me just make sure that this is good to go. And please let me know if I do that again.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, all right. So how to know where you're going to stack up and how the chances are stacking up for you. What I always say is start by looking at the averages. It's just a good place. Like it's so tempting in this process to say, but maybe, but we just saw those acceptance rates. And by the way, yes, there is that small chance, but you need to really calibrate how those chances are. And that's why it's so important to look at the acceptance rate and really internalize the numbers of the people that the few numbers of people who are accepted and the large number of people who don't make it. And then once you've done that, then you start asking yourself, well, where do I stack up? And here are some of the stats to keep in mind. These schools, their average GMATs are very, very high. You can see that the average GMAT across the board is around 730. There's an asterisk because some of these are median, some are averages, but the numbers are high. They're well into the 700. The GMAT, of course, is out of an 800, 200 to an 800 scale. So there's really not much wiggle room above a 730. So the school is seeing a lot of highly excellent, the schools are seeing a lot of highly excellent scores. And, from their perspective, the number matters to them. Not only does it tell them that you have the academic chops to succeed, but as importantly, it's a number that feeds one of their averages that they use as they market the caliber of their program. That's why some of the reason it's annoying, but it's why those numbers are so important. And then it's good to know that the schools are more and more accepting GREs, which is good. Some people will test better on a GRE. These schools really don't care which test you take. They want to see your best score. But nevertheless, even though that if you were to use the tool that translates these GREs to the GMAT, you might see comparably a lower GMAT. The average GRE, the GRE would translate to a lower GMAT than the average GMAT that the school requires. But nevertheless, it's still an aggressive score. It's still above 700. So does that mean that you will not get in if your score is below a 700? No, not necessarily. It just means that now the chances are even that much smaller, just working against you, as opposed to helping their averages. You can also see that they have, these schools do want to see a healthy GPA. For those of you who are applying internationally, they're less focused on, they still want to see excellence in the program, but they're less concerned about what your number is, because they're really looking at this 4.0 scale. But, they will be looking like, were you a top performer? What are the proof points that show that you were really above your cohort? And then you can also see the average years of experience. It's around, this is at the time of matriculation, it's around 5 years. Again, that doesn't mean if you have 6 years, you're not getting in, or if you have 4 years, you're not getting in. But it's good to know where you stack up against those averages when you're thinking about the schools. All right, so that's first place, is like, okay, so how can I stack the odds in my favor? Start by making sure that you're as close as possible to these averages to the extent that you can. GPA, you can't go back in time. So one or two things, it's going to put more pressure on that test score to get that test score high, or possibly it's going to say, look, I'm still going to go for these schools, but I want to also look at other schools because I'm falling a little short than the average that the school is going to require in terms of the GPA or the test. So that's another way to think about it. But let's think about the other stuff that the schools are looking for. And so I've looked just at Stanford and Harvard, mostly because they're very upfront and quite short about what they're looking for, where Wharton is a little less direct in terms of what they're looking for in terms of candidates. Stanford GSB seeks intellectual vitality, demonstrated leadership potential, and personal qualities and contributions. Harvard Business School, on the other hand, but similar, looks for a habit of leadership, analytical aptitude and appetite, and engaged community citizenship. Okay, so they want to make sure that you're smart, that you're a leader, that you've got good values. This is the way that they described it. I would also say how we think about it at Gatehouse is they're looking for more than that, what they put forth, and what we see that they're looking for. This is in our words, not theirs. We consider this, there's a box of like table stakes. So yes, they want to see that GPA and that GMAT, and they want to see the intellectual vitality and things like that. But here's at the end of the day, for folks that are going to get into these programs, they're looking for a record of accomplishment, initiative, and impact. Proof that you have done what you've needed to do to create change, to drive impact throughout your career and your undergraduate time in your university. Consistent excellence. These schools really are, I don't know how much they're seeking excellence or just the very nature, because they're so competitive, they can demand it. But at the end of the day, they do want top performers, whatever lens you're looking, they're looking at you through. So in the workplace, being a leader in the organizations that you're involved in, being top ranked in your firm, something like that. They will want to see those demonstrable standout performance on your end. They also do want to see evidence of leadership. If you think about it, the MBA is really a professional degree to build great leaders. So they'll want to see that beginning evidence that you have been a leader thus far in your life, and that you'll be, with the MBA, on the track to be more of a leader going forward. They also want to see reasonable and logical goals. This is one that you're in control of. That's one of the reasons I like to mention this. A lot of this other stuff, like, oh, wow, maybe you weren't a top performer last year, and that's fine. But this, in terms of your goals, you're very much in charge of that. The schools, the way I think about it is, they're making bets on people, and they want to bet on people who are likely to succeed in the future. And they're going to assess your goals and engaging how clear your journey is, what your purpose is. If I always say, if you were looking at two candidates, they were both really, really strong. They had all the right stats, all the right names, great recommendations. And one had a very clear plan for the future, and the other one didn't really know where that he or she wanted to go. Who would you bet on? You bet on the person that has a plan, has a goal. That doesn't mean you have to have everything locked down. Doesn't mean you have to know which firm, exactly which industry, but you have to know what's driving you. And that's really important to these schools in particular. And then I'd also say that they're going to be searching for values that matter. I'm going to read these words, but I actually do not. One pro tip: I don't want these words when you actually get to drafting essays. I never want to hear that one of you put these words into your essays. But you want to show it with the stories that you mentioned. So values that matter: grit, reliability, creativity, humility, empathy, and resourcefulness. And I'm sure that list could go on and on, but I feel like these are kind of, the du jour of the moment, if you will. Again, don't use those words. Know that that's what they are looking for, and think about the stories that you have undoubtedly already experiences that you have undoubtedly had that show off those attributes. They might be something that you want to think about in your essays. Not necessarily, it's all going to depend on what's true to you, but do know that that's things that they're looking for. And they can also see that stuff in your resume as well. So making sure that you're showing times when you've taken initiative or gotten things done, that's really important to these schools. I would also say that there's other things that can help increase those chances in your favor that you might not be thinking about as much. I'll just put the kind of strong pedigree. And what I mean by this is, these schools do, again, I don't know how much it is that they're looking for this, but they can, and they know what certain things mean. So if you went to an undergraduate institution that is very well regarded, it is going to automatically give them some confidence. If you have if you did well in the program, if your GPA, your grades are high in that program, they're going to automatically know the caliber of your education, of your skills, because of that. So they do look at, or they will consider it could affect their, again, your chances. Are you coming from a top university? Are you coming from a well-recognized firm and a strong performer there? It's sort of both the curse and the benefit. If you are working at a management consulting firm such as McKinsey, yes, there are a lot of applicants that will apply from McKinsey. It's an excellent firm. It has a strong reputation, but yes, you're competing against a lot of other people in your class, but at the very least, it conveys a certain level about you already. So recognize that. And the important thing is not to say, oh my gosh, I don't have any of these things, I shouldn't apply. It's again, just so that you can start internalizing, what does this mean about your own risk profile? And do you need to either add more schools into the list, or even contemplate not applying to one of these schools? That's only a decision that you can make, but it's just something to think about. The flip side is maybe a very underrepresented pedigree, I'll say. So this is schools or firms or backgrounds or careers, whatever it might be, that are not strong pipelines to school. There are certainly those sort of in-between firms or schools that are fine, but not necessarily additive. But once, I think these schools are getting, I don't know if they're getting better. I think they've always been intentional about building diversity and inclusion in their classes. So they, just because if you went to a school that they haven't heard of, that's okay. But you do want to make sure you are a top performer there. I think that helps a lot. And same with your firm. If it's not a known entity, that's okay. But make sure that they know that you're a strong performer when you were there. All right. So these are things I want you thinking about. How can I, again, tip the scales in my favor? So reality, again, just to get those numbers so that they make sense. Every firm has a top performer. Every school has a top student. Now multiply that by 1,000 colleges and 1,000 firms in 50 countries. The reality is there's just too many good candidates. And while they're, we've even spoken to admissions officers. I remember I was talking to an HBS admissions officer, and we said, just ballpark, what percent of applicants are admissible, are worthy of a spot in the class? And she said that it was between probably 40 and 50%. That's really high. So most of, or not most, just shy of half, if not half of the applicants that apply to HBS have a realistic shot of getting in. And yet the acceptance rate is only 10%. So even if you clear all the things I just said, if you've got those high scores, if you went to a great university, if you have a great job, great recommendation, you're still then sort of at the whim of these programs as they start crafting their classes. So if you the real headline here is, if you're determined to go for it, know the stats, know what you're up against, and then put that noise behind you and stay focused on your execution. Because if you are going to put your hat into the ring, you want to make sure that you're giving the absolute best job that you can in your application. So let's look at some, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but let's look at some triple winner case studies just quickly, just to give you a sense of some consistencies. And these are all folks that I know personally, I worked with personally. So of course I'm a little biased. I think they're all wonderful. I always think my clients are wonderful. But I just want to show a little bit of the variety of the folks that are able to get that acceptance from Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. First case study is a male. He had a very high GMAT of 760. See that theme pretty much throughout this. A 3.7 GPA, again, right in line with the averages at the schools. He majored in finance. He went to a top-ranked school with a strong business program. It is a school that can see folks going to these schools from it. So it has a good reputation. His career is in venture capital. I should say pre-MBA career was in venture capital, which is kind of a big deal, actually. Venture capital is a bit of it's a space where a lot of people want to get into, but there aren't a lot of positions. And the fact that he had crafted a path to get him there as an undergrad was actually really quite compelling. I'll mention a little bit more, but after he created a VC club on campus. He had an incubator. He advised entrepreneurs. He really got into it and built an ecosystem that lasted once he left campus as well. I also like to just think about what his personal story was. His personal story was interesting. He dropped out of university briefly to join a new VC and incubator that had come to the area, the city he was in. He did return to school, but in leaving school briefly, he really cemented himself on a path to get into VC, which again is very highly coveted. And I think the schools liked both his willingness to take the jump, but also the fact that he would be able to contribute his perspective as a venture capitalist. So they got into all three programs. Should have done another quiz. We could say, where did he end up going? But I'll leave that one till the next time. Let's look at the next one, a female. Similar major. So stats, 730 GMAT, 3.9 GPA, so a little lower, or just on the average in terms of the GMAT, a higher GPA. Again, majored in business. Different school, but top ranked with, again, a good business program. This woman had done a more traditional path, but still very great names on her resume. She was at a top tier investment bank, then did private equity investing. She had really solid leadership. She had begun as a graduate. She'd begun an alumni mentorship program with her school, working in tandem with her school. She was a regular a mentor to one person, but also involved in the organization. This was one that she was a mentor and tutor to a high school student. So she was really involved. She was a peer tutor in school as well. And she also had an interesting personal story. She had a pretty big challenge coming out of college where her father started asking her for money. She was finally getting a salary. And it was an unexpected turn of events when her father started asking her for money. It required her to grow and mature pretty quickly, which I think enabled her to tell a powerful story. So you'll note here, the thing you might be taking away is stories are really important in this process. So case study 3, another male, lower GMAT, 700 GMAT, again, got into all 3 programs, a 3.8 GPA, majored in business and real estate. Again, top-ranked school. None of these are the same, but top-ranked school. He was focused on hospitality with a focus and real estate, M&A. He, at the time of application, was in Asia. He actually spent most of his life in Asia, but went to school in the US and then lived back out in Asia. He was in his current job. It was a super small team. It's just him and one other person. So he was in charge of doing a lot. He had to be all over the place and getting establishing themselves. So he ended up taking a lot of leadership in a non-traditional way. He wasn't managing anyone, but he was getting everything done. So, and then personal story, he came from a very prominent family. But he was very hopeful to craft his own path and make his own mark in the world. And I think it was compelling for the schools. All right, 2 more. I mean, if you're like me, some of these times when I see these applicants, I'm like, wow, they're all so amazing. And they are. But on the flip side, I do want you to recognize we all have amazing stories to tell. It's one of the problems with looking at these trifecta winners, that they are really impressive, which is awesome. But that doesn't mean, even if one of these schools isn't the school for you, there's not a school for you. That's what I tell myself when I look at these. So this is case study number 4. Female, 730 GMAT, 3.9, majored in industrial engineering. So not a business major. You don't have to be a business major to go to business school. But again, those high stats, right? They're very, very strong performers. She went to a well-regarded university, though not necessarily top, but she did go to get an aggressive degree. Women are underrepresented in STEM, degrees and areas of focus. So I think that might have been appealing. Her career was focused as a rotational. She was in a leadership program at a healthcare company. And she had decent leadership in both college and the firm. She had started a number of lunch and learns and cross-functional learning opportunities or cross-departmental learning opportunities. Her personal story, she took a job in Europe while also at the same time dealing with an unexpected family loss. And so she was both experienced tremendous growth professionally and a lot of, trying to heal herself personally. And I think she, because of it, had really gotten in touch with who she was and what she wanted out of the future. And I think she communicated that well in her application. And then the last one, again, you guys now know what to expect. High stat, 730 GMAT, 3.65 GPA, majored in international studies, a well-regarded college, though not necessarily top ranked. This one was another one in the healthcare space, really good leadership. He was also an entrepreneur. He'd started a book business in school. He also started a number of volunteer efforts. And I think he started a clothing company as well. So a lot of little things going on. But really, faith was very, very important to him, his religion and his connection with faith. And it had guided him thus far and still is his sort of true north. And I think that was something that allowed his story to shine for the admissions committee. Okay, so now that we're all like, wow, these people are perfect, let's get back to reality and the rest of us. I want to just mention some tactical considerations. So how can you sort of replicate this in your own way for you? That's what this is all about. So if you're going to apply to all 3 of these schools, the first thing I want you to do is really think about why. Why is business school necessary? Where am I headed? And why is business school in general a necessary step in getting there? As we talked about in a few slides ago, knowing your purpose, your mission, your vision for the career that you want to have is important. Whether it's knowing the industry that you want to be in, the impact you want to have, it's being able to know what you're fighting for career-wise and being able to communicate that. So even before you start thinking about schools or anything like that, figure out your goals and why business school is a step in getting there. And then the other piece of this sort of pre-work is to really brainstorm and inventory your experiences, your stories, your values, your accomplishments, your struggles. All of that is fodder that helps us better understand you. As you saw in the previous slides, so much of the essay, the resume is really in some ways clinical. Your resume, it's a record of your work history, but your essays, that's something very different. So make sure that you think about the broader you when you're inventorying your experiences, so that you can communicate via the application who you are in totality, not who you are just based on exactly where you've worked, exactly what you've done at work. So once you've done this baseline work, then I'll leave you with 3 quick school-specific comments, and then I'll open it up for questions. So tactical considerations for HBS. Leadership is super essential for HBS. They want to see a real history of leadership at all times. And history can come in all shapes and sizes. So maybe it's being a leader of a club, but maybe it's just getting championing a new idea, or even leading others when you don't have authority over them at the workplace, like getting an organization to implement something when you have no real hierarchical standing above them. To really recognize your different leadership experiences and make sure that you capture them. But then again, it's also your values and your ability to learn from your experiences are tremendously important. The school, the essay, it's very open. What matters? What more do you want us to know about you? It's not just a list of accomplishments and leadership experiences. It's the values and the decisions that you've made. That's also very important to HBS. A pro tip with the essay of what more. So I think there's this tendency with HBS's essay to think that you have to say why HBS or what your goals are. You don't necessarily need to. They might fit, but you have to do all that preliminary work to understand who you are, and then decide what can they gather from your application already, and what else do you want them to know about you. And very often, you're not going to be mentioning your career or HBS in your HBS essay. Okay? All right, quickly onto GSB. So Stanford. So my biggest thing is like the question that the GSB, well, it asks 2 questions, main questions. The first is what matters most to you and why. My biggest piece of advice is answer it truthfully. I realize that sounds obvious, but it's really hard to. It's very hard to. So just trust me, trust yourself. The right answer is the true answer for what matters most to you, and the true answer is the right answer. It's as easy as that. It's like you have to dig to really understand what is that core driver within you. But then once you get there, I don't want you to second guess, like, oh, what are they going to think? Or is this what they want to hear? What do they want to hear? They only want to hear what answer is right for you. Okay? And then another pro tip, why Stanford, their second essay. We feel this tendency to start complimenting Stanford when we hear it. It's just a career essay in disguise. So my tip for you is give them a vision of where you're headed in the future, connect it to the past, and then tell them explicitly how you're going to leverage Stanford to connect where you're going to where you've been. If the school is learning more about GSB in this essay, it's not worth it. They already know a lot about GSB. You want to make sure they're still learning more about you than they are about your knowledge about the school. Okay? And then Wharton. Biggest tactical consideration with Wharton is it's not a runner-up school. It's a great institution. Yet, if they feel like you are putting them on the list in case you don't get into Harvard and Stanford, well, that'd be silly because we know the numbers. Chances are, like the numbers are what they are. So there's a good chance you're not getting into Harvard and Stanford. I say that to everybody, so don't take it. It's just the way it is. So Wharton, you want to make sure like Wharton can stand on its own feet and you can be genuine, specific, and authentic in explaining why Wharton is a good fit for you. Do your research, connect with current students, really make the case of what it is that makes Wharton special in your eyes. And a pro tip here, I think there's this assumption that that Wharton is a really competitive place and it's all finance oriented. Don't listen to that. I think they really do want to focus on teamwork. So if you feel like you have to show how much you always were a leader, that's important, but so is showing that you're a good team player And so don't, resist temptation to sort of cover that up because you're applying to Wharton. In fact, show it off. They want team players, people who can move a team forward as part of a team, not just a leader. All right, guys. I am going to go ahead and open it up for questions now. I'm also going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see the questions come up if there are any questions. And then the other thing I'm going to do, or see, make sure. What I would also say is that definitely come to Gatehouse Admissions. That one, I just wanted to make sure I could see you guys, which I couldn't. So I would ask Abhijit maybe to throw up the URL for Gatehouse on the screen if there are any questions. I'd say reach out to Gatehouse Admissions, just a quick plug. We talk to prospective candidates all the time. This was obviously focused on the general you, but as I hope you took away from this, each of you are individual. You've got your own stories, and happy to help you think through your stories. So schedule some time, a free consultation with us so we can help think about your strategy application, your application strategy. Okay. All right, some questions. Is it really important to have great work experience related to corporate world, or could it be related to helping others? Maybe not making money while helping them, or both. So there's not one answer that works here. I think this is a great question, Abhishek. It can absolutely, sometimes in our day job, so to speak, we have limited opportunity to really make a difference and to lead and have this amazing time. It could be really hierarchical. It could just, we have no room for it. And then absolutely things that you're doing outside of work, or ways that you are helping people inside of work, whichever it might be, that's really great. So it definitely is something that schools will consider, and things that you should plan to bring up in your application. It always is going to be a little bit of, it depends. But you don't have to, as I said, you don't have to make your essay about your professional experience. You could make it about this other stuff, whatever it might be, the way that you help people. Maybe there are times that you help people in work and outside of work, or volunteer work, or just ad hoc. Any of that is fine to explore in these essays. What about international applicants with 3-year degree? Any specific cons? So I think there's not specific cons, and these schools are willing to consider applicants that have already, well, actually it depends. Actually, let me go back. It will depend on the specific schools if they will accept applicants with a 3-year degree. And usually they're pretty explicit. So it depends where the 3-year degree was from, and they will give guidance on whether or not you can apply to that school. But then there are definitely schools that will be open to it. So it's a little bit of doing your research to see which ones, given your own experience. But I would say this, and when I started to answer a different question, which was, what if you've already gotten your MBA? What if you got your MBA right out of school? That happens sometimes. That's okay too, that's acceptable, but you just wanna make sure that you have your case for why business school down pat, so that you can convince them that you need this next step in your career. How can average GPA in undergrad be compensated other than a high GMAT? So there are a few things here. They do consider other coursework. So you could look at like HBS Core, their online program. It's great. It's very business oriented. So it certainly will convince them that you're serious about business school. You could take another class, like a college accredited class online, like UC Berkeley or UCLA. They do distance learning for college accredited classes that can give you that nice A that you need. All that will help. But on the flip side, I still don't want to mislead you or misguide you. These schools, like, the reality is, as I said in the beginning, they have too many good candidates. They have too many awesome candidates. So when push comes to shove, if they have the opportunity to choose, they don't need to make exceptions. And so while I wish I could say, yeah, you can compensate, like it's easy to compensate for a low GPA if you don't have a high GMAT, it's hard for these schools because they are not necessarily, they don't have the reason to make an exception. So what I would say in that case is that's when you want to start thinking about possibly other schools to add to your list. Or, also do think about things like MBA math, that's another course, HBS core, or taking college classes could be ways to offset it. But at the end of the day, the challenge with those is they don't hit the school's numbers. The two numbers that are reported out are average test score and average GPA. And if you're not helping one of those, it's much harder to convince the school to let you in. Any other questions? Do these schools give negative points to profile having 10 years experience, given that the GMAT scores in 710, 720? I've definitely worked with people that are, in their early 30s into these programs, and they've had success. They will want to know, the bar doesn't change, right? They want to see consistent excellence across the board. If, two things, that's one thing, like so everything, you have to be a top performer. You have to have strong performance in school. I would say your GMAT score, I'd probably say you need to have it. Well, no, I would say you want to have it higher, closer to the average, given that your work experience is not an average. So it's not the situation where because you've been out so long, they don't care as much about your GMAT. I wish that were the case, but it's not the case because, again, it's the number that gets communicated out there to the public. So they're always going to care about that average. So it's not that they give you negative points. It's just you're still going to have to be a superstar candidate, and you're going to have a clear vision of why you need school to reach goals that you have. And I would also say on that one, you might consider, that's another reason to look at other schools. There's definitely schools that are, happy or open to older applicants that have more experience. Oh, and the last thing I was going to say is you're also in sort of the gray area that in another year or two, an executive MBA program might be a better fit. And there's going to be more flexibility both on the age, but also on your test score as well. Can working in a blue chip company compensate for 3-year international degree? Sorry for questioning again on the same comment. Really depends on the school. It really depends on the school. I will never say never. And there's peculiarities. So you should look at, like, my best advice is to look it up. Like, I know both GSB and Harvard are very explicit about the requirements that they're looking for. And I just don't know, like, it's going to depend on the school. As I said, it's going to depend on the school. The blue chip company might compensate, but again, it's going to have to be a really stellar story. Did Coursera and edX courses help to boost your profile? Yes and no. So I'd say yes, because it's awesome that you're taking courses that you want to learn, that you're looking for personal growth. That's never a bad thing. That's always a good thing. And these schools see it this way. But two things just to be aware of. If you're going to take an extra course to show that, to compensate for a lower GPA, then you're going to want to have one that will give you some sort of note or like a grade or certificate instead of just completion, because then they at least know, like, so if you did not do well in your undergrad program, but you took this course, if there's no way to say that you did well in the course, they still don't have proof that you're a strong student. So if you're trying to compensate for a lower GPA, it's always good to do these courses, but I'd prefer or want you to get something that gives you, that's like an accredited grade or something that they will recognize as a stamp of your high performance in the class. But then on the flip side, again, it's not going to necessarily change the way that they look at the numbers, just because the numbers are, the numbers are the things that they report out to the public. All right. Anything else? Can you talk a little bit about HBS? What matters? What more would you like us to know? I know it's a very broad topic, but any high-level tips? You would like to give you like to give candidates? Yes. There's like a million, so it's hard to. This one's a hard one because it's just so. It depends on you. Um, I think the big thing where I see people fall down, if you will, on it is when people really do just use it as a on one end of the spectrum, they just repeat their resume and kind of tell all of their accomplishments, and there's no cohesive thrust or narrative that ties it together. On the other hand, it's almost like it's someone's go way out and really tries to do something more cerebral, and that's not it too. I think the best thing is really understand the things that are driving you, the things that have influenced your decisions, um, the things that have taught you the most, and that have made you who you are today. Try to boil those things down, like the one or two or three things that you want to tell them, and craft your essay around there. I generally say in terms of length, I would say you want to target around 1,000 to 1,250 words. After that, it starts getting a lot of a burden. It starts becoming too much of a burden on the reader. So I would even say 900 to 1,250 is the sweet spot that I see. As I said in the presentation, you don't have to mention why HBS or your future goals. You'll have an opportunity to do that in the online application. So you can do those things. But if you're like going back to your current industry or even firm, which is totally acceptable, you don't want to write an essay about that because they'll probably, everything they will know about you will already be in that context. So you want to tell them things that you don't know. I mean, you do want to. It's twofold. It's telling them things that they might not be able to otherwise glean from your application, but then also just giving them the color that's behind the bullets or the quick. You want to show reflection too, like you've learned from your experiences. I hope that, for what it's worth, I spend a tremendous amount of time helping clients think about what topics and how to stitch something together for HBS or GSB. So I recognize that my advice is a little less tactical than I want it to be, but it's kind of the nature of the beast with both this one and GSB. There's no quick tips on it, unfortunately, but hopefully that helps. How much would working in partnership role at MasterCard and Visa in the NYC help a student stand out? I mean, I think that's great. It's all going to depend on how have you done? Are you a top performer? How have you taken initiative? How have you led to impact? What sort of accomplishments have accrued? How do you spend your time outside of work? What were your stats like? All of it is part of it. At first blush, yeah, that sounds great. Most things do sound great, certainly to me. This is not one that I'm like, oh, yay, that's great, or bad, that's good. But it's about what you've done in that role as much as anything else too. But one other thing, if you were an international applicant, I think that is always great when you can show that you've gotten some experience working internationally internationally with the US. It just is it's another way to mitigate or lower the risk profile, because if they see that you've already successfully acclimated to working with people in a different culture, or with Americans specifically, given that's where the programs are, that just reassures them. Again, doesn't mean you will not get in if you haven't, but that is why that would be a plus. If you are applying internationally, have that experience, that will give them that confidence that just might reassure them. Does work experience from Big Four give an edge? So same. So Big Four, let me ask you, do you mean consulting or accounting when you say Big Four? Because those, I think, have changed. People use them somewhat interchangeably. You could also maybe mean something else. So if you can clarify that one, that'd be great. And I'll take a sip of my Dr. Pepper. Or I could answer on both. So I'll assume Big Four first means accounting. Oh, tech consulting. Okay, tech consulting. All right. So it helps. It's never enough. like it's the same, it's the same mantra each and every time. It's what have you done in that job? How have you demonstrated that you're a leader? How have you been a standout performer? Again, it's going to communicate some level of excellence to the schools. So that's a good thing. But then you want to make sure within it that you always shine and that you've got strong recommendations, and that you've really left an impact, left in your fingerprint, so to speak, on the organization. All right. Everybody, thank you very much for attending today, or watching this whenever you might be watching this. Please do reach out to Gatehouse. As you can see, I love talking about this stuff, and I know these schools feel elusive. I will also just end on one point. I didn't go to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, and I'm doing just fine. So I think, although there is this cachet and they're hard to get into, there's a lot of great schools out there. It's all about figuring out what you need to get from school and then seeing if there's a place that makes sense given your profile and what you want to achieve. So I wish the best of luck for all of you. Please reach out to Gatehouse if you want to chat or learn more, and I'll be rooting for all of you in the meantime. Thank you.